And we begin tonight with fascism and how it takes root. Now, it isn't usually a dramatic storm the palace coup like we saw on January 6th. It's more often a deal, a bargain between the would-be dictator and the establishment, both political and media, who believe that wielding actual political power will take him. It's usually what we often, it will actually tame him, I should say. It's actually what we often get wrong about fascism. In describing the connections between interwar Europe and the present-day U.S., scholar John Gans writes, quote, "We have this image in our heads of the fascist rise to power that comes from fascist propaganda, but it is much more political than that." In a review of Gans's new book, In the American Prospect, Rick Perlstein also notes the crucial role of the, quote, "responsible conservatives who made their peace with the strong man, believing he could be controlled." Perlstein recalls Germany's Vice Chancellor Franz von Papen, the architect of the 1933 coalition that made Adolf Hitler the chancellor. When the people around Papen voiced their concerns about putting Hitler in power, Papen said, "In 2 months, we'll have pushed Hitler so far into the corner that he'll squeal." There's also the phenomenon of elites who become supplicants of the fascist leader, forgetting they ever had any concerns at all. Remember what Lindsey Graham tweeted back in 2016 when Trump was still an outlier in the party? I do. Quote, "If we nominate Trump, we will get destroyed, and we will deserve it." When Trump won the White House anyway, Graham got busy reducing himself to a MAGA footstool in the U.S. Senate. Proximity to power will do that. Like Trump, Hitler was also viewed as a clown, a goon who could be kept in line. And then there are the accommodations that the media makes with autocracy. In November 1922, the New York Times gave its readers their first glimpse of Hitler. It was a profile of the fascist leader's early rise in Bavaria in Germany that got a key point very wrong, asserting that, quote, "Hitler's anti-Semitism was not so violent or genuine as it sounded." Before he rose to power, Hitler staged a coup known as the Beer Hall Putsch. It was a coup that failed. Sound familiar? Hitler went to prison for it, but the failed coup set the stage for Nazi Germany. And when he was freed from prison just over a year after the failed putsch, the Times offered this unfortunate and incorrect assessment, that Hitler had been tamed by prison. The next year, Mein Kampf was published. So much of this sounds familiar, and believe me, I wish it didn't. The same thing happened with a lot of other autocrats. The establishment thinks they can be controlled, and poof, they're stuck with them. The thought that these men could be tamed is what we're seeing right now in the presidential election year, where politicians, journalists, and voters speak of a dangerous person getting reined in once back in power. And those who are legitimately afraid of this outcome are being quiet about it. Last week, the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, brought together thousands of participants from around the globe. The Davos consensus is in. Trump will win the election, based solely off of polls, headlines, and mood. But executives could only refer to their prediction as a geopolitical risk. Yet privately, per reporting by CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin, they were far more explicit, saying they are frustrated, upset, worried, and nervous about a second Trump presidency. But they don't want to say that out loud for the same reasons as last time: fear of retribution. Ditto on the Republican establishment. These people, let's just be clear, despise the MAGA base, but they also fear them. So they say, let's just make common cause. He'll sign the bills we give him, we get our tax cuts, we get the conservative court and their rulings to ban abortion and affirmative action. We just need to control him. After, of course, bringing him to power. You don't get more establishment than the party chair, Ronna Romney McDaniel, who said this last night on Fox.
I do think there is a message that's coming out from the voters, which is very clear. We need to unite around our eventual nominee, which is going to be Donald Trump.
The final piece of this puzzle are the voters who crave an autocrat. Trump and people like him appeal to a group of Americans who hate the modern, multicultural, and increasingly liberal, secular society they live in. And they imagine that if the real secret majority wasn't being thwarted by a secret cabal of swamp creatures and communist libs, they would win. They think the real secret majority wants a theocracy like they do and hates immigrants and fears LGBTQ people like they do. But the majority actually doesn't. Last night, the New Hampshire results showed that Trump is clearly going to be the nominee. But independents, College-educated voters and Republicans who are unwilling to dismiss Trump's legal jeopardy voted in large numbers for his rival and former employee, Nikki Haley. These are not great numbers for a former president who is essentially running as an incumbent. It's not even clear MAGA politics are a majority of their own party. It's just that so many Republicans are either passive or afraid. They've just let MAGA take over, while the autocrat enablers bow and scrape and gaslight you into trying to make you believe that Trump is king.
This is a referendum on the Republican Party, and that's something I'll be saying in my speech tonight. This is a true change for the Republican Party. It says that not only do we support President Trump, we support his policies. And any Republican that isn't willing to adapt these policies, we are completely eradicating from the party.
Did you ever think that she actually appointed you, Tim? And think of it. Appointed, and you're the senator of his state, and she endorsed me. You must really hate her. No, it's a shame. It's a shame. Uh-oh.
I just love you.
No, that's why he's a great politician.
Joining me now is David Jolly, former congressman and MSNBC political analyst, and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, professor of history and a scholar of authoritarianism at New York University, and the author of Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present. I am going to start with you, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, because Mussolini comes up in that same article that I was reading from earlier, because there is this notion that happened in Mussolini's Italy and in Adolf Hitler's Germany, that the establishment, whether it was the establishment politicians or press or business establishment, said, you know what, let's just let him take power. He'll be better once he's in office. I feel like I see the same thing happening again now, the sort of rationalizing that, no, we made it through the first term. The system will hold. Let's let him back in. I'm seeing it broadly. What do you make of it?
Yeah, you're right to see it again. And it's total bad faith. It's one of the reasons I wrote Strong Men was to show the destruction and devastation that authoritarians cause. And the concept I work with in the book is authoritarian bargains. And you mentioned something like this in your opening, the deals. And there's a lot of corruption involved, but elites, financial, political, other business elites think that they're going to, profit from staying quiet with the strongmen. And only when it's too late do they realize what a price they and the country has paid. And what's interesting, it was not just the famous cases of Mussolini and Hitler who were brought in by conservative elites. Even when there's a coup, like in Chile, and this was one of the case studies that most affected me when I wrote the book. In Chile, the conservative Christian Democrats actually thought after the coup that Pinochet would restore order and then give power back to them in a few months. And of course, that didn't happen. And the head of the Christian Democrats, Eduardo Frei Montalva, started speaking out against the junta, and he was poisoned. He died when he went into the hospital. So that's like a morality tale. And that kind of sums up the terrible fates that these people have. And so it's very sad for me as an American to see this happening today with so many elites who should know better.
Speaking of elites who know better, absolutely. John Cornyn, a Texas senator, David, he's endorsed Trump. Last year, he said that Trump actually couldn't win. This is what Cornyn said in 2023. I think President Trump's time has passed him by. I don't think President Trump understands that when you run in a general election, you have to appeal to voters beyond your base. To me, this all boils down to electability. I've been through quite a few elections in my life, and there's no prize for coming in second. In other words, losing. He has now joined 30 total Senate Republicans in endorsing Donald Trump.
Yeah, Joy, and I think John Cornyn would probably say exactly the same thing today, that Donald Trump is not the Republican Party's strongest candidate against Joe Biden. But I think what it reflects, and the reason the framing of this conversation you're having now is so important, is it has become obvious the trajectory of Trump's authoritarianism rise. And what I mean by that is, consider in 2016, as he secured the nomination, there were a lot of people who were not ready to endorse him. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Paul Ryan. Leaders were not ready to endorse him. Even the party said, some voters, should I vote for Hillary Clinton instead of Donald Trump? There was this reticence, this hesitation. He gets elected, and by 2020, I think you saw the full bargain in place. Even protagonists like Adam Kinzinger admitted that in 2020, they voted for Donald Trump's reelection because at that point, he had cemented his grip on the party. I think what we're seeing right now and what has been so telling in Iowa and New Hampshire is Donald Trump's complete taming of the party and of the movement. Consider how quickly Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, others turn around and endorse Donald Trump and say he's the person we need to lead us. Consider the voters, how quickly they now take what he says as biblical. In the Iowa exit poll that suggested 2/3 of voters say the 2020 election was a fraud. That is a complete taming of the party and the movement. And I think that's the danger, because then when Donald Trump reaches for extra constitutional authority, when he argues perfect immunity in court, or if he gets reelected and says, I don't need to abide by the Constitution, the movement is now fully with him without any hesitation whatsoever.